All right. Well, questions are mounting over former President Joe Biden's shocking stage 4 prostate cancer diagnosis, which has aggressively spread to his bones. While we wish the former president well, a key ally of the Obama administration is asking why it wasn't caught sooner.
He did not develop it in the last 100, 200 days. He had it while he was president. He probably had it at the start of his presidency in 2021. Yes, that I don't think there's any disagreement about that.
So the shocking cancer diagnosis follows a brutal week for former President Biden, as a new book and the release of the long-awaited Her tapes exposed more troubling instances of a mental decline that was covered up and hidden from the public. But some of the media are already suggesting the cancer diagnosis might earn the former president a little breathing room from all the scrutiny.
Those conversations are going to happen, but they should be more muted and set aside for now as he's struggling through this.
It seems to me, Jessica, this debate doesn't end at all, but it is briefly put on pause as a result of today's news.
But the Her audio release continues to reverberate as Democrats and the media try to learn lessons from the cover-up.
And that is a crime against this republic. And I think the Democrats are going to pay for a long time for being a part of what is now being revealed to be a massive cover-up. We need to apologize to the American people that we were a part of something that wasn't on the up and up.
But ultimately, in retrospect, you can't defend what the Democratic Party did because we are stuck with a madman, with a corrupt president in the Oval Office, and we should have given ourselves a better chance to win.
Hindsight is 2020. Obviously, if we could redo this tape and play it over again, we would do things differently.
It's hard to convince somebody to give up their car keys.
Yeah, Jesse, we all wish the former president well. I mean, it's just absolutely awful for any family to learn this about their loved one. But there's a lot, it seems, that we are learning in the last 24 hours. A lot, it seems, that perhaps we didn't know along the way. What do you make of all this?
Well, first, my heart goes out to the Bidens and the Biden family. Very unfortunate diagnosis, and we hope he beats it. But a lot of people are speculating whether this was medical malpractice or whether this was a medical cover-up. And we have every right to speculate because they have been caught in so many lies. Now, so the medical cover-up is not being said by Jesse Waters. It's being said all over the media by Democrats and by physicians. They're saying that this was caught possibly earlier and then nothing was released and then possibly exposed as a way to blunt the impact of the Her report audio release and the book. Now, I don't think that's possible, but at this point, anything's possible. The other one is the medical malpractice. How are you not going to give a guy a PSA test? How are you not going to give someone a test and then not release the results? Did they not give this test to Joe Biden because they gave it to the last 3 presidents and then they released the PSA numbers? So who knows if he even got tested? He was supposed to have had a full test a year ago, and they said there was no cancer detected. Well, we need to know exactly what tests they did. And since 2000, Joe Biden has broken his foot. He's had skin cancer. He has had 2 horrible bouts with COVID-19. And then he was living as president with prostate cancer. And the entire media said he was healthy as an ox and that they said he was running circles around Binder. And so this doctor, O'Connor, was his personal physician. There's a funny axiom that says, having a personal physician 24/7 around the clock is a leading indicator of death. A lot of celebrities, a lot of wealthy individuals have these doctors on call and they kind of give you anything and they're just there to protect the brand, there to protect the status and the job. That happens with some people, but this guy O'Connor takes it to a next level. This guy was brought in from Delaware, and he was in business with the Biden family. And this is his oldest president in American history, probably the sickest sitting president of this century, and he never gave a press conference. In 4 years, O'Connor never came to the press and said, this is what the president is dealing with. He needs to be brought in, he needs to be subpoenaed, and he needs to answer some of these questions. I can't believe if he had won, Joe Biden would have died in office and Kamala would have been president. And the doctors and the media would have been like, oops, sorry, we missed it. Wow. Wow.
Well, Howard, there are multiple experts who have lined up in the wake of this news to say, it would be shocking that this kind of cancer wasn't noticed during recent checkups, that it had to have been developing for quite some time. Howard Foreman, Yale Medical School, it's inconceivable that this was not being followed before he left the presidency. Urologist David Shusterman says it's insanely unlikely someone who gets annual checkups would not have noticed this developing cancer.
So my prayers, like yours, Jesse, go out to his family. This is a tough diagnosis. I have friends and family who have this, who've had the diagnosis, and I can only imagine a tough struggle and a tough road ahead. I align with Jesse on this. I think that the fact that the President of the United States is not getting as exhaustive of a review of a physical, of the kind of medical examination one would expect, and then to have all of that revealed to the public in 2025, 25 years into the 21st century. You combine that with some of the things that people were saying about President Biden throughout his presidency, questioning the cognitive abilities, some of the mental health abilities, and then the physical things that happened when he fell up the stairs, down the stairs, off his bike. We deserve better. I hope what we really learn from this, I'm not one to look backwards, although I pray for him. I hope that what we do going forward is to ask these doctors and physicians, Jesse, we ought to have a different standard for all of this. When you think about the president's role of growing the economy, keeping the country safe, we're in basically a new economic Cold War with China, and Russia is emerging again. We need to know everything about our president, and this shouldn't be by chance. By any measure. I listen to Dr. Emanuel. He's far brighter than I am and more experienced and more educated than I am in these matters. I do have a dear friend whose wife got a stage 4 cancer diagnosis very late. They had not seen it before, and she had an injury and got the diagnosis and passed about a year later. So these things I imagine can happen, but when you are the President of the United States, with the kind of care the President should get, we should not be surprised by these things. But I'm like you, my thoughts and prayers are with he and his family. I know this road ahead is going to be a difficult one.
And again, we wish him the absolute best. Greg, is it fair for some in the media, including David Axelrod, now to be saying that we should set aside any talk about the cognitive cover-up during his presidency as he battles this cancer?
When they say something like that, you have to believe that that's the reason why they're breaking the news now. So you do mute and you do pause. The timing is telling you that this cancer is being used as a tool to deflect from outrage to sympathy. But get this, normal human beings, we can have both. We can feel sad for somebody who has cancer. Like Harold said, we all know people intimately who have cancer, who are dying from cancer, and who will die of cancer. So we could feel sad, but that's not going to infringe on the space in my brain that is reserved and dedicated to this cover-up of his incapacitation. So you're not going to get a mute or a pause from me, but nice try. We're talking about, like, how could this happen? We've always been saying about all of these problems in the last 8 years. How did this happen? How did this happen? How did this happen? I say 8 years because this has been going on before Biden was president. The neglect is on purpose. For example, just focus on Joe Biden, the elder abuse line that we kept hearing. Why did it continue? Because Joe was docile and fragile and offering no resistance to any part of the progressive agenda. Joe's dysfunction may have been caused not by disability, but by debility, meaning he was worn down on purpose, deliberately kept feeble and weak, which made him pliable, like a POW, except the W stands for White House. Joe's dysfunction was not prevented when it could have been because it kept him easily managed. He was always tired. He probably didn't want to answer questions or sign things. So we've seen a series of colossal blunders and deliberate cover-ups. All are ethically indefensible. All you can do, if you're doing this stuff, is tell yourself, consider the alternative. And the alternative to them was always Trump. That was their narrative. Like, they can cover up this guy who's physically and mentally feeble, because look at the other guy. It's Trump. So Trump is an existential threat. That narrative became justification for every kind of immoral behavior, including allowing violence, the implosion of a border, cover-ups, blatant illegal activity, siding with gangbangers up to now, Hamas sympathizers. You can approve of anything if you sell people the belief, you assign the opinion that Trump is an existential risk. They knew about all this stuff. They covered it up.
Well, we did see the media having to deal with the release of the her audio and the her tape today.
Yeah.
What appears to be the many stages of coping, Katie. Van Jones said that Democrats will pay for covering up Biden's decline for a, quote, long time.
Yeah, because this is a total betrayal of the American people. This is about breaking of trust, and it's very difficult to get it back once it's been broken. Now, in politics, trust can be a relative term because of the industry that you're dealing with, but they covered up thing after thing after thing. And then when the American people who are part of this Republic Democratic process were allowed to ask questions about the President of the United States who was elected, they were told that they were crazy, that they were mean people for questioning the president's cognitive state, that they weren't empathetic. And now you're seeing that happening again with David Axelrod saying, well, we can't really talk about it anymore. And the implication there is that if you dare to ask questions about the betrayal from the Biden White House, from the Democrats as a whole, then you're just not an empathetic person. You don't understand when people get diagnosed with cancer, when it's really a bigger issue of what's been going on for the last couple of years. I don't know how they get out of this, because in order to regain the trust that they've lost, you have to be very transparent, overwhelmingly, and yet they're still doubling down on covering up and not talking about it. So politically, for them, it's very difficult for them to go out and say, you can trust us and believe us when we're talking about things that we'll do for you, when they can't even come to terms with the fact that this was obvious for years. The White House doctor not coming out to give press conferences, not answering any questions. I went back through all of the letters that the White House doctor put out, not a single mention of this. And also, it's kind of a betrayal to the president. I mean, how did you not, if this is what they weren't doing, give someone of that age, the president of the United States, that kind of physical test? I mean, how could you not give the test?
Those questions will be asked for a long time. Many people watching right now go out and get those tests on a regular basis. Katie, thank you for that. Up next, Hillary Clinton and Tim Walz taking aim at President Trump with some really wild accusations.
Click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You won't get it anywhere else.